Rum-de-dum-de-dum. But if this quick spring nerve, or this jumping jack nerve in us boy, he said, gets in the way of what we yearn for, can't we pinch its throat or give its fretful pulse a little tap? John sighed and the light died out of his face. He uncurled his long legs and straightened them out. He ceased to be the eager intellectual jackal and became the helpless, slouching, sunshine-loving tramp. There had suddenly come over him, as he looked into the eyes of this man, a chilly sense of something so monstrously different from everything he had ever met that it frightened him. The tone in which Mr. Garrett had said, "Pinch its throat," sounded like the shuddering heave of all the ground underneath, all the things that were warm, familiar, natural. What were the huge antennae of Bloody Johnny's soul fumbling towards, out of the depths in which it stirred and moved? I shouldn't wonder, thought John, if the old man's not got bored to extinction by all this grail business, and miracle business, and new religion business. I shouldn't wonder if what he really wants is that delicious death to boredom that I get when I make love to Mary. The old girl upstairs couldn't give him any thrill of that kind, and he's been snubbing Rachel lately. I know that, for I've seen him together, and he cares nothing for boys. I believe he's turned against the whole caboodle of this Glastonbury stunt. Sick to death of it he is. And I don't blame him, the poor old beggar. What he wants is a plump little Abishag to cuddle. He's a warm-blooded old rogue, and he's gone cold in the vitals. Thus did John struggle, by the use of the more cynical considerations from his heathen stone-worshipping nature, to cover up the primordial ice crack, the glacier crevasse among his sunlit earth rocks, which the problem Mr. Gurd perhaps quite erroneously had uncovered before his pessimistic imagination. To an earth-loving, vicious East Anglican, it was impossible even to conceive the idea that Gurd of Glastonbury might deliberately kill himself in order to gain more life. He could do it to escape from life, that was easily imaginable, but not this other. No, thought John. There never has been, and there never will be, among all the millions and millions and millions of suicides since the beginning of the world, one single one like this. It's as impossible as for a man to get out of his own skin. Life itself would fight against it with tooth and nail. The old chap was just fooling himself. What he really wants is a sweet young doxy in his bed, but hey-ho, the fellow would never hurt his old woman to that tune. So there we are. I wonder if he is going to pension me off. Got some pastry in my teeth. It was at this point in this memorable interview, the last that John was ever destined to have with his grandfather's friend, that Mr. Garrett did turn to practical matters. He laid before his secretary the whole array of the startling things he had already, though strongly against the advice of Mr. Robert Stilley, arranged with the bank to have done. It was a sad witness to the difficulty of starting a real independent commune in the midst of an old kingdom like England. The Glastonbury Bank remained absolutely untouched by the new regime, save in so far as the large sum of money piled up by the town passed into its hands. Mr. Garrett had bought small annuities for his wife, for Cordelia, and for Crummy. He had also, John was perfectly right in his instinct here, purchased for John himself an annuity of £150 a year. Not bad. He had, in these arrangements, entirely exhausted the whole £40,000 legacy left by Canon Crowe. And so John was wondering, as he stood by Tossie's dresser, watching those four feminine heads, whether to wait till tonight to tell Mary, or whether to tell her at once, and obtain her reaction, and Tossie's too, to the exciting news before Tom came in. He recalled exactly how Mr. Garrett had looked as he let him out of his own front door only an hour ago, and how the man had abruptly cut short his almost tearful gratitude by the curious words, "'Tis his blood money, lad, 'tis his blood money. And ye may never forget that, none of ye, when Easter comes round and ye eat and drink the life in the death." John found himself, when later in the spring twilight they were walking past the vicarage gate together, sorry he had not waited till he got Mary alone to tell her about it, instead of blurting it all out as he had done, and making her jump up from the table with her gray eyes big as saucers. It was the way Tom had taken it when he came in that troubled him now. He hadn't been very considerate of Tom's feelings, chattering together, he and Mary, about how they would clear off to Northwold at once and hunt for a cottage on the Dinnington Road. It was Toss, of course, who had been the one, not he or Mary at all, to notice how Tom was hit. The girl had begun hurriedly talking at once about how Tom and she would have to save up and come and join them in a few years when the twins were bigger. "But Toss," Mary had murmured at this point, "you'd better bear to leave Glastonbury. You'd never bear to leave Glastonbury, would you?" And the words had hung suspended in the air, full of subtle reproach for them both. It was then that he had for the first time caught the grim bitterness of what Tom was feeling in his aching longing for his native soil, and his craving to show Tossie the wide waters of Diddington Lake, full of pike and perch and water lilies. They caught sight of the shirtless sleeves of Mr. Weatherwax as they passed the vicarage gate. The old rogue was pulling up weeds underneath some rhododendron bushes at the edge of the shrubbery. And as he labored, he sang, "The brewer, the miller, the maltster, and I lost a heifer, lost a filly, lost a ding-dong. When daffodillies look up in the sky, pass along, boys, pass along. The brewer, the miller, the maltster, and I left a heifer, left a filly, left a ding-dong. Down in a grassy green grave for her to lie. Pass along, boys, pass along." No idea what that sounds supposed to sound like. No cue. Maybe somebody can help me out here. I'm a little tone deaf. The gardener's back was turned to them, and he did not rise from the stooping position as they passed. Something, however, about the sound of his thick bass voice, muffled and muted by his bending position, was so gross, so earthy, so suggestive of rank-smelling roots, tossed-up lobworms, slug slime on a pronged fork, and bittersweet human sweat, that when Barter, who always relished talking to Rabelaisian's fashion to Tossie in front of the fastidious, though not exactly squeamish John, made some coarse joke about this fellow's enormous rump, John got a sudden, quick, spontaneous revulsion from his old friend, which was not lessened when Tossie started off on one of her ringing peals of Benedict Street laughter. "Oh, how glad I'll be," he thought to himself, "when I'm safe back in that boat on the Wissy. By God, I know what I'll do. I'll hire that boat in Adler Dyke from that fellow so that we'll have it when we want it." It suddenly occurred to him that it was in connection with the smell of alders and with the look of that dark, sturdy foliage that he had thought of Tom that day he was with Mary, and he set himself to recall the boyish figure in his childish memories. As they debouched into Chilkwall Street and were passing the old Tith barn, John heard Tossie, Glastonbury girl as she was, say something about one of the evangelistic creatures. It must have been a remark of more surprising lewdness and more amusing originality than John could quite follow, and it did not win much favor in his ears. The truth is, he thought, I'm not suited for a sociable life, or to make merry with my friends. When once I've got married to myself in Northwold, I swear I won't see a single soul, and I won't invite a single soul. We'll live in absolutely alone, Mary and I, absolutely alone and to ourselves. This girl's a decent girl, and her kids are nice kids, but I couldn't have stood living in the same house and having everything a quatre much longer. This 150 from the old man is a heavenly escape. It's a windfall out of the air. It's a benediction. Tonnerre de Dieu. It's as much one of his miracles as is curing any of those people. Christ, I'd soon be converted to the worship of Girard the Saviour if the old chap did kick the bucket. I hope he saw how grateful I was. I did kiss his hand. I'm damn glad I did that, for I think it pleased him. Perhaps in his whole life, the life I dare say of one of the greatest men who's ever lived, I'm the only person who's ever kissed his hand. And think of the number of ridiculous society whores whose hands are kissed every day. Oh, damn and blast this human breed. They were passing all Mr. Girard's improvements on Chalice Hill now. In the green twilight, in spite of the litter and the presence of many unsightly shanties, the mayor's Saxon arch stood out nobly and impressively. Beyond the Grail Font, too, they could see the newly erected rotunda, and this also had a dignity of its own at this hour. It was indeed a sort of heretical temple that Bloody Johnny's architect was building. John surveyed it with infinite disgust. The dear old chap, he thought, ought never to be betrayed into playing the mountebank. If he's anything, he's the founder, not the expounder. He'll spoil it all if he goes on trying to explain. Who were them Saxons, Tom? Inquired Tossy as they passed these various erections. Were 'em savages, them early Christians? Did 'em worship King Arthur? Her question seemed to tickle Barter hugely, and he at once began chaffing her with her ignorance of history. But John thought to himself, Evans would say that the real cause of old Girard's getting on the rocks and talking of suicide is his disregard of Arthur and his Welsh demons. I wonder if it's possible that... And his mind went back to the inexplicable event that had happened to himself at Pomperless Bridge. John's hatred of Glastonbury and its traditions was betrayed to the end by his incorrigible interest in psychic problems. Mr. Girard's mysticism had always influenced him more than he was willing to admit. And in any case, he was a temperamental heathen rather than a materialist. He was quite as skeptical of materialistic explanations as he was of the occult occurrences that gave rise to them. The fancy came into his head now that in his daily visits to Chalice Hill and his constant disturbances of that dangerous earth, Mr. Girard might have come under some deliberately evil spell prepared long ago by those old Celtic magicians. Evans ought to have stopped him, he said to himself as they passed St. Michael's Inn, from fooling with those Welsh fairies by resuscitating a great thundering saint like Dunstan. Mad Bet's windows be shut, said Tossy, and she's curtains drawn. I be afeard thick means her's peeping out as we, and making faces as we. Bosh, muttered Barter crossly. For some reason, this particular fuss that all of Glastonbury girls made about Mad Bet irritated the man's Norfolk solidity. Bosh, Toss! What a baby you are! The window's shut because it's chilly tonight. The women's probably in bed. No more in bed than thee be, Tom, replied his wife with spirit. Tom don't like I talked about Mad Bet, she added. He be more afraid of she than I be. I tell you, grumbled Barter more vehemently than the occasion seemed to demand, that woman is in bed, or else she's strolling harmlessly up Torrock Hill, just as we are, in the cool of the evening. You Somerset people make too much of an old Trots's eccentricity. Your Betsy, or whatever you call her, wouldn't excite any attention at all if she lived in Norfolk. You're pampered her down here and petted her till she thinks she's a regular Mother Shipton. We'll leave them climbing that ominous hill. Ah, boy. Well, we're getting near the end now. Till next time, I'll see you in Glastonbury. Cheers.